Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Welcome once again to Compass Points Podcast, brought to you by the fine folks behind CompassKnox.com, which is me, Jesse Mayshark, and my cohort and colleague, Scott Barker. How are you, Scott?
Doing fine. How are you doing, Jesse?
I'm doing well.
Good.
Here we are in June.
Already.
I know. Happy Pride Month to everybody, first of all, we should say.
Yeah.
Of course, we had sort of a short week here because started with Memorial Day.
Yes.
But we still had a fair amount actually going on for the first week of June.
We packed a lot into 4 days.
Yeah. So this week we're going to talk a little bit about culture at the Knoxville Police Department, county budget and tax rate, some interesting news about a local strip club. We don't get to talk about strip clubs much on this podcast, so we take every opportunity that we get. Talk a little bit about change in leadership at the Knox County school system, and then also a new homeless study that came out, which will also be the feature of our interview this week with Bruce Spangler, the executive director of the Volunteer Ministry Center. So that's what's coming up. Scott, tell us about culture at the Knoxville Police Department. What's going on?
Well, this is a study that's going to be made in conjunction with the arrival of Paul Noel, who is going to be the new police chief.
And that is pronounced Noel.
Noel.
Like the song Noel.
Merry Christmas,
it's
Noel.
Not Noel.
Yeah.
Right?
It's not Noel. It's Noel. And he is going to take over at KPD on the 13th. And City Council approved a study of KPD's culture that's already started. They hit the ground running. It's a $40,000 study that is being paid for through the East Tennessee Foundation, and it's going to consist of talking to focus groups within KPD, doing an employee survey, trying to get a gauge of the culture of the department before or as Chief Noel takes over, to kind of help give him an understanding of what he's getting into. The firm that's doing the search is called The study is 21CP Solutions. It's a firm that was formed by alumni of the 21st Century Policing Task Force that President Obama had set up, and about seven of the members of the 11-member committee formed this group, and they are focused on ethical policing, effective and ethical policing, and so they've worked with departments all over the country, and they're working here. They actually proposed a much more comprehensive dive into KPD and KPD's culture and a lot of policies and procedures and what they do right and what they do wrong. That still may be done, but that's not been funded yet. The total package would have been $300,000.
So this is just kind of a first phase, basically.
Yeah, the city's just taking the first phase for now. They may, and I think probably will, move forward with the other phases. A lot of that's going to be contingent on funding. This is something that kind of came up post-budget, so we don't know where that's going. One other interesting thing that's come up about this, speaking of funding, is that Noel comes from the New Orleans Police Department. In New Orleans, there's a foundation that supports the police department. They do all kinds of things like provide financial assistance to families of injured officers. And they also help fund some things that kind of fall through the normal cracks. And they're kind of looking at things like this for them to fund, but it would be a standalone foundation. Of course, they would have to form it. It's going to take time.
So is that's something that Noel would like to do in Knoxville?
It's
as
something
well?
Noel would like to do, and it's something that Mayor Kincannon is willing to look into. And so that's going to be something way down the line that could happen. The first things are going to be, of course, Chief Noel coming in and getting acclimated and trying to figure out some things. He's got some big hires to make. He's got 2 of the 3 deputy chiefs positions are open. The 3rd will be open within a year, so with a retirement. And so this study, though, is to kind of let him know what the lay of the land is.
And there's been a lot of talk about police culture the last few years. Of course, there's been allegations and some confirmed instances of racist behavior, sexually inappropriate conversations and so forth at work. And Mayor Kincannon and I guess now former Chief Eve Thomas have always kind of insisted that those are kind of individual cases, that we don't have a quote-unquote culture problem at KPD. But it sounds like this study is pushing at that question a little bit, right?
Yeah. What the mayor and the former chief have always said is basically, we've got bad apples. This study is going to look at the orchard, so to see, if there's a systemic issue, what that is, what it entails. The surveys will be the survey and the focus groups are supposedly going to be confidential, so to encourage candor on the part of officers. So, if that is indeed the case, then it might indeed give a kind of a true gauge of the attitudes and behaviors of police officers for Chief Noel to take into account as he takes command.
Mm-hmm. But this is just talking to people within the department, right? It's not like they're not going to be going out and talking to people in the community saying, what issues do you see with KPD?
That would be something that they would probably be doing if they do the more comprehensive part of what 21CP has proposed. That would be further down the line and cost a lot more money. But if that is done, that's when it would be done. It would be further down the line.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, speaking of money, County Commission approved its budget for next year this week. As expected, there was no drama, actually almost no discussion. This is one of the shortest public meetings I've ever covered. They called a special meeting on Wednesday, June 1st. The public hearing started at 5 p.m. Nobody was signed up for it, so it lasted about 5 seconds. And then they moved to the meeting where they voted on the budget, the capital plan, the tax rate, and a new organizational chart for the mayor's office. They did all of that in just about 10 minutes. It was a nice, I think you and I have both spent untold hours, days, months, maybe years at this point of our life sitting in public meetings. And so when you get one of these that is over and done with pretty quickly, it's nice. There was actually a little bit of interesting information out of it. Of course, they approved the $954 million budget, which we have talked about before. It includes raises across the board for county workers, teachers, deputies, and does not include a tax increase. But County Chief Financial Officer Chris Caldwell also let commissioners know that we have talked about how both the tax rates in both the city and the county, after they've adopted their budgets, will be reduced here in a couple of months once they have the final numbers in from the countywide reappraisal. Both of those rates are going to have to be adjusted down. And the county's rate is going to drop to an estimated $1.55. Actually, it's $1.55 and 9/100ths of a penny, which is very low. The county's current rate is right at $2.12, and that's unchanged, and that's the rate that Commission actually approved this week. But probably in August, that new rate will come back. And I asked Chris Caldwell, when was the last time the county tax rate was that low? Because we know the last time the county raised taxes was in 1999, and that boosted the rate to, I think it was $3.32 per $100 assessed. Now it's at $2.12. It's going to go down to $1.55 per $100 assessed. And so Caldwell went back and looked through their records, and their records only go back so far. And so what he could put his hands on in his office, he was able to go back to 1947. And the lowest rate that he found was in 1947, and it was $1.88. So even back in 1947, it was still higher than the rate that they're going to go to this year. This is almost certainly going to be the lowest tax rate that the county has had since World War II, maybe since ever. Like, we don't actually know.
At least 75 years.
At least 75 years, which is not surprising. We knew it was going to go down, but I think, again, we've talked about this a lot, but that just shows you the effect of when you have a combination of not raising property taxes and then consistent reappraisals where the valuation goes up and the rate has to be adjusted down, that tax rate just keeps dropping and dropping.
Yeah, and that's something that governments can point to say, oh, look, we've got they can say we've got the lowest tax rate that we've had in 75 years. Of course, they haven't lowered it themselves. They've had, it's been lowered because of the reappraisal.
The total amount of revenue that they're going to get theoretically will stay the same. Some people will pay more than they did last year. Some people will pay less. That all depends on the reappraisal. Yeah,
but they can always try to make the political point that we've got the lowest property tax rate in 75 years, but they actually haven't had to lower the rate themselves. It's not really the case, and but it's an easy political point to make.
Yeah, and County Mayor Glenn Jacobs, I don't think is too worried about his reelection prospects. But if he were, it's certainly not a bad thing for him in an election year to say, "Oh, by the way, the rate's going to go down to this level." So, shifting gears away from county finance to something a little more headline grabbing, the Ball Strip Club on Alcoa Highway, formerly known as Bambi's, to those of you who've been around for a while. What happened with the Ball this week?
It's the Ball Gentlemen's Club.
The Ball Gentlemen's Club.
Not you can call it a strip club if you want. Anyway, the District Attorney General Sharm Allen, and in working with KPD under an order from Judge Steve Sword, shut down the Ball because of numerous violent activities associated with the club. A lot of them outside. She says some inside. There was a homicide in the parking lot of the club. I can't believe it was last year.
I think last year, yeah.
And then there have been several violent altercations. There's practically a riot out in the parking lot at one point, a big, massive fight. There have been numerous reports of shots fired in and around around the club. According to the DA's office, the KPD's responded to something like 80 calls at the location. And so under Tennessee state law, a business that is considered a nuisance can be shut down, and Judge Sword ordered it, and the Ball Gentlemen's Club is shuttered for now.
And is contesting it, right? That the owner of the club put out a statement saying that they're going to fight this.
Yeah, they're gonna fight it. I don't know exactly what they're going to do. I don't know if they're going to file a lawsuit. I don't know what the process is on that. But he's going to go down fighting. He doesn't. He looks at himself as running a legal, legitimate business, and that this action on the part of the DA's office was improper.
And he's been, the owner of the ball has been involved in a long-running legal dispute with the city. It's one of the few remaining strip clubs in Knoxville or Knox County,
Right.
and they've basically been in court for, what, 15, 16 years?
Yeah, something like 16 years. They are disputing the city's adult business ordinance, challenging its constitutionality. That ordinance was passed back in 2005. Almost ever since then, this litigation's been pending. In fact, it was started by the previous owner of Bambi's, who is now deceased, and the current owner has picked up the lawsuit, and then other businesses have been involved. In fact, some of them are no longer around, and some of them have changed names. So the upshot is it's going before the Court of Appeals for the second time now, and basically they're one of the sticking points for the club is that it requires people who work in adult businesses to get licensed by the city, and they think that that's unconstitutional, and also that it was that they relied on faulty evidence to prove what you have to prove to pass something like this is that businesses can have a negative secondary effect on the community, and the lawsuit contends that they didn't prove that, and so it's all tied up in court. Has been tied up in court. It takes forever to adjudicate these things. It's been pending in front of the Court of Appeals for a couple of years now. So,
and I guess if the shutdown order stands, then probably that lawsuit becomes sort of irrelevant. If the club's not there anymore.
Yeah, if the club's not there anymore, that part, at least that plaintiff doesn't matter anymore. But I think that I'm not sure, how long this is going to be shuttered. What he has to do to get get prosecutors come and unlock the padlocks, but it certainly cuts down the amount of revenue he can generate to pay for that lawsuit.
Sure.
So.
All right, well, we'll follow that and see what happens. Another piece of news happened. Actually, we're recording this on a Friday afternoon. It's going to be released on Sunday. Something that's going to happen between now and then. At midnight, Friday night to Saturday morning, Jon Rysewyk will become superintendent of the Knox County school system. The school board set his start date to be Saturday, June 4th, and that was set so that current, I guess now I should say, those of you hearing this in the future, former Superintendent Bob Thomas could supervise, kind of oversee all of the scheduled high school graduations. The last one's Friday, so Jon Rysewyk will take over on Saturday, and I sat down and talked with Rysewyk this past week as he kind of prepared to assume that mantle, and wrote a fairly long profile. If you want to get to know our new superintendent a little bit better, you can find that story at CompassKnox.com if you're a subscriber to CompassKnox.com, and there are many good reasons to be a subscriber, that being one of them. What are your impressions of Rysewyk?
Well, the one thing that stands out to me from your reporting is that even though Rysewyk has been principal and administrator within the school system for decades, or a couple of decades, he really is kind of a change agent. He is not afraid of change on a personal level because he spent some time away from the school system, getting the Emerald Academy off the ground.
Knox County's only charter school.
And then also what he did to turn around Fulton High School when he was the principal there. So he's got that track record of change. And even though he's pretty, he's definitely a creature of the system.
Right. He's an insider, no
Yeah.
doubt. He's spent almost his entire career with Knox County Schools, been there for a couple of decades. But yes, I think you're right. That's something that I think certainly the majority of school board members really want to see. Now, school board members may have different ideas about which things they want to see changed, and we'll see how that goes. Rysewyk is expected to start rolling out some of his administrative changes, as soon as this coming week. So we'll watch for that. But anyway, that story is there for those who want to dive in a little bit. And then the other thing we wanted to hit on coming out of last week is this study. It's I guess the annual count they do of the homeless population, or estimate they do of the homeless population in Knoxville. Why don't you talk about that a little bit and set us up for our interview segment?
Sure. Every year, usually in late February, the city of Knoxville and homeless service providers fan out across the county and do a count of the homeless population. Just one night, they go to get a count from the shelters. They get a count from any other place where someone who's homeless might be. They go out to try to find encampments and all that to try to get a kind of a snapshot of homelessness. It's not. It's one of these things that isn't indicative of the overall problem necessarily, because people move in and out of homelessness all the time. But it does give a snapshot, and the numbers went up dramatically last year, up about 50% overall. There were a couple of reasons. COVID is responsible for some of it, and responsible for some of it not being as bad as it has been. The numbers in 2021 were pretty good, pretty much what they had been in the previous years. Even though COVID was here, a lot of that was attributed to the eviction moratorium that was in place, and also stimulus funding, stimulus checks that people received, extended unemployment benefits that made the difference in a lot of people's abilities to stay housed. Those things have gone away, and the numbers went up. Another reason numbers are going up was actually because of a program that appears to be working, and that is another COVID related thing, is that there was a program in place to give vouchers to people for emergency shelter in motels. And it's temporary, it's going to run out, but that actually gets people in the system and gets them counted. So these are people who might not have been counted before, who are counted now. So all these things have kind of combined to increase the number of those who are unhoused in the community. We've got Bruce Spangler, who is the CEO of Volunteer Ministry Center, coming up. Jesse and I interviewed him, and Bruce is primarily concerned about the chronically homeless. Those are some of the most difficult to serve, people who basically are long-term people who've been living without a permanent home, and they have to have under the definition, they need to have a disability. It can be a physical disability, it can be a psychological disability, it can be a addiction issue. But they're the toughest ones to take care of, and that is what Volunteer Ministry Center tries to do through permanent supportive housing. And we talked to him.
All right, let's go to the interview.
Spangler. He is the CEO of Volunteer Ministry Center, providing services to those who are unhoused in our community. And welcome, Bruce. Thanks for joining us.
Glad to join both of you. Thank you.
Earlier this week, a report came out called a point-in-time report, which is basically the results of a one-day survey or census, if you will, of the homeless population in Knox County. They had about 55 service provider employees and volunteers who fanned out all over Knox County. They counted people who were living in shelters, people who were unhoused and living in encampments or wherever they happened to be. One of the big findings was that there were 1,178 total that day who were in the homeless population, and that is about a 50% increase over the count from the year before. Now, the count is a one-time event. It's not, the population fluctuates, and
Right.
so, but it is something that providers look at. Bruce, tell us what this, what the point in time count tells you, and what it doesn't say.
Sure. Well, I think for one thing, as you mentioned, it is a point in time. It gives us a small window, but it becomes a manageable window to understand what's happening in terms of folks who are either sheltered or unsheltered, but yet still experiencing homelessness. And so it helps us as an agency try to understand where we can be most effective. And I think if I may just dive in, that we really focus on folks who have an experience of homelessness in a chronic state. And when I look at the numbers and compare them to 2020, of course, there was no point in time done in 2021, but for the number of folks who are chronically homeless and who were sheltered or unsheltered, it was a 44% increase. Among those who are unsheltered, the increase was actually 63%. And the reason that I hone in on those two numbers is that in essence, that is the core of our understanding of approaching the experience of homelessness through the Housing First philosophy. And so that really just gives us a good framework of knowing the number of folks who need permanent supportive housing in our community.
One thing that people might not, who don't follow issues with the unhoused population, is they don't know the definition of what chronically homeless is. What is that definition? And it
Yes.
is a definition. So
It is a definition, and it is actually set by Congress. And by law, it is actually a protected class, because the presupposition is that someone has a disability, and due to that disability that has lent to a long duration of homelessness that exceeds at least one continuous year, or 4 episodes that add up to 12 months or so. And I think that's kind of been redefined, that even just 12 months in the past 3 years, if you've experienced homelessness in that way, that you're also chronically homeless. In essence, Scott and Jesse, folks who are chronically homeless fall in a category of the most vulnerable citizens in our community.
And
I'm sorry, go ahead, Jesse.
I was just going to ask if the numbers that come out in the report, which, as you say, is just a one-day count, and the number of people who are unhoused or homeless over the course of a year is going to be a higher number than that. But does that tally with what you see? Are over the past 2 years, have you seen increased numbers in the populations that you serve, increased demands for what is still a pretty limited amount of permanent supportive housing?
Yes, I think that prior to the report, I would have said that I was experiencing that homelessness was kind of plateaued. However, chronic homelessness was really going up. This report tells me otherwise about non-chronic. But the reason why I think that we see a dramatic increase in the number of chronically homeless is that, as you know, our community went through a 10-year plan many years ago. And by virtue of that plan, you had the catalyst for the development of Minville Manor, which we own and operate, Flanagan Landing, which is owned and operated by Knoxville Leadership Foundation, and even Helen Ross McNabb has some permanent supportive housing. And so there was a great push to reach those particular individuals. And now, it's been over a decade, for the most part, in terms of any permanent supportive housing opportunities.
Well, you are addressing that right now. Our Volunteer Ministry Center is building Caswell Manor, which is an apartment building in East Knoxville next to Caswell Park. Talk a little bit about that and how much of an effect that might have on these numbers.
Yes, it will provide a housing community for 48 single men and single women. And we hope to open sometime in the fall of this year. So we're kind of on track to make sure that happens. I think I do want to underscore that in terms of permanent supportive housing, folks who live there are paying rent, and it is permanent housing. But it has the combination of supportive services as well. We don't provide all the direct services because we don't work in a vacuum. We don't work in a silo. You have to have other providers engaged in that. But it's a very effective model, despite the critics. We often hear that it's not effective. But right now at Minvilla Manor, 44% of the present residents have been there for 5 years and longer. So it really works in that way. The other thing that we hear, it's very expensive. And I guess if you look at the cost by square footage, it is expensive in that way. But we built with low income tax credits, and Minvilla was low income and historic tax credits, which means there's a private investor who makes an investment, and there's instant equity for VMC in terms of that building. So it's debt free in that sense. But folks do pay rent. We do provide supportive services, and the combination of that is what makes it all possible, what makes it all effective. I think I was just going to say national studies as well as international studies said that housing first approach can be effective to 75 to 95% of the folks who have some presenting mental health issues.
One thing that I spoke with Sean Griffith with the city of Knoxville, he's the homeless program coordinator there. And we were discussing permanent supportive housing. And one key point that he made, that it differs from the emergency shelters that most people think of when they think of services for the homeless community, in that there's not turnover in the same sense. As you mentioned earlier, these are permanent residences. And so the same number of units are going to be, instead of cycling people through the way that emergency shelters do, these are filled, and that means that more would have to be built to serve more people.
That's correct. That is correct. I do want to admit, it's not foolproof. That we are probably effective in terms of 90% of the folks that we serve in ensuring that they sustain housing for a year longer. The other 10%, and especially the unsheltered, chronically homeless, are the folks who become the most visible in our community. And so we're not the optimum type of housing. Housing has to be affordable, but it also has to be accessible and it has to be appropriate. And Minvilla Manor and permanent supportive housing meets all of those modifiers. But there's some citizens in our community who need a different type of housing. I never want to tout that it's 100% proof, but it's pretty close. I don't drink whiskey, but I know that as the proof goes up, it gets pretty strong.
But do you see a need for, because permanent housing, can be expensive to develop, and as we've certainly seen, sometimes can be politically difficult to locate, sure, and so forth. Are there needs for other? Somebody was talking on our Compass subscriber Facebook page about, for example, a program in Denver where they have these it's essentially like controlled campsites, which I think some cities around the country have been experimenting with, where there's land that's set aside or dedicated to having essentially camps that have access to running water and porta potties and so forth. Is that something that and I realize that somebody would have to actually do that and run it. And I know that's not VMC's model, for example, but are there other models like that this community may need to think about beyond just trying to provide that permanent housing for everybody?
Sure. Jesse, there's no question about it, in terms of a sanctioned campsite is worth exploring, and we're having some internal conversations about that. You're right, it's not our model right now. We do offer the foyer, which is a low barrier housing focused shelter, but of course it only deals with 30 people. But how to deal with a large population, is a short term. It's a short term. And sometimes we get short-sighted when we forget about the long-term solutions. But it is something that we are having internal conversations about, and whether we want to do what is best for those that we serve. And at the same time, we live and work in the community, and so we want to do what's best for the community too. So we're conversations in that play in those. We want to be a community player. Let me put it that way. I think the thing that is important for me to realize in this work, and I've been on the Broadway Quarter now for 2 decades, is that we're really dealing with the issue of poverty. And so when you have the experience of poverty, and now that you put on top of that the experience that what COVID did in terms of especially folks who were sheltered and unsheltered, and then now with the eviction moratorium going away, all those things have really piled up. And I think that there's no question about it. Anytime there's any kind of natural disaster, it is our neighbors and our citizens who really struggle financially, who end up being getting the worst of it. And so I just have to keep that in mind, that we're dealing with a big social issue, and just takes good public policy to respond to all of that.
All right.
Well, one of the other COVID-19 initiatives that was put in place was housing vouchers for to be used in hotels for people who were in an emergency basis. And of course, that is going to be going away at some point this year. And that's another population that, as you mentioned, you're talking about poverty. These are generally, people who have recently become homeless, and often because of financial considerations. Is that a big concern among the within the community of homeless providers, that you're going to have a larger influx of people who are completely unhoused?
Yes, and I know that the Knox County Homeless Coalition, that is, almost on top of the list right now of how to deal with families and children. No one can stand the thought of a child, let alone an adult, having to stay outside or stay in a car and those kinds of things. But yes, there's no question about it. It does impact those at that level.
Well, and as some of the pandemic relief kind of winds down, because a lot of local governments did get extra money, including money they could use for various kinds of social services, I guess, is this something that you and other providers, see a need for our local or state governments or other funders to step forward? Like who fills that gap?
Right. There's no question about it that the influx of those monies have made a difference in the lives of some. There's even studies that suggested, at least momentarily, some folks rose a little bit within the poverty ranks, if I may put it that way. But I think there's some good practices that have come as a result of that, and there's ways that we're all looking for to institutionalize that. I think that one of the as I reflect upon my career and as I am approaching retirement, that one things I've always kind of thought about, I never see this city and county have to do a bake sale in order to raise money to fill potholes in our community, because it's a policy that we're going to have good roads. And I think that when it comes to folks who have no place to live, that once again, that we need a strong effort of public policy response. We live in a kind and generous and benevolent community, no question about it. But until we deal it from that larger perspective, you're not going to see a big change, at least in my opinion.
Okay, Scott, you got anything else you want to hit on?
Well, I think we'll circle back around to permanent supportive housing again. You'd mentioned a couple of the challenges of building permanent supportive housing. What do you see as the future? What would have to happen for more units to come online and help address the chronic homeless situation?
Well, I think that the city administration has done a good thing with the Housing Trust Fund to incentivize the development of housing. What I hope, Scott and Jesse, can happen is that the successes of Mid-Villa Manor and Flanagan Landing can prove that it's an effective model, and that not only it works, it's not an endangerment to the community by any stretch of the imagination. If not, it's an improvement to the community. So I think that if we can be good communicators about what has happened in the walls of Mid-Villa and Flanagan and the others, that I think that gives us a little more hope than we had 15 years ago.
All right. Well, thank you, Bruce. We appreciate you joining us, and that you've got a lot of work to do. One of the things about working with the homeless population is there are no days off, and it's 24/7. So we'll let you get back to work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and thanks again to Bruce Spangler for talking with us, and obviously we'll continue writing about homeless issues. It doesn't seem, it's one of those kind of evergreens.
Yeah, it's an issue that has seems like it's always been with us and always will be. So it's like writing about crime or writing about government. I mean, there's always going to be something. Nothing's going to be resolved.
Right, it can get better or worse. Obviously, we're seeing increased homeless numbers, and that's clearly a matter of concern. And as Bruce talked about, there are some remedies to this that we know work on an individual case-by-case level.
Right.
They're just difficult and expensive. So
Absolutely.
We will continue to cover all those issues. Looking ahead to this coming week, there's not a ton on the civic agenda. The school board is having its monthly meetings. They'll have their workshop Monday at 5 p.m. and their regular meeting Wednesday at 5 p.m. One of the items on the agenda is they're going to be talking about the evaluation process for the superintendent, for the brand new superintendent. These will be Superintendent Jon Rysewyk's first board meetings as superintendent. Of course, he's been at every meeting for the last many years, but he'll be sitting in a different chair. It changes things. And also, I think we expect to see, as I said earlier, some announcements from Rysewyk this week about some changes in the way he's going to set up his administration that may or may not be talked about at these school board meetings as well. So we will certainly cover all of that. And Planning Commission has its monthly meetings this week, right?
Yes, Planning Commission has its monthly meeting. It's, as always, full of things like rezoning requests and plans approval requests and things like that. As you well know, as we talked about on here before, land use development is a big issue, and every month at Planning Commission there are one or two developments that come up that have people that live in the area opposed, if not to the development period, at least to the scale of the development, and then and they will go at it with the developers, and the planning commissioners get to play referee. So There will be several of those on the agenda. One other thing that's on the agenda that people have been following is I still call it the baseball stadium. It's a multi-use stadium where the Tennessee Smokies will be playing in a couple of years. Anyway, the final site plan for the stadium is coming before the Planning Commission. It's not going to be a controversial thing. It's unchanged. There's still going to be the stadium oriented north to south, essentially, and surrounded by 3 mixed-use buildings with residential on top. That some of the residences will be able to look onto the ball field. So you get your with your lease, if you're an apartment, with your lease, you get essentially a ticket to the ball game. But that'll be coming up on the agenda as well.
And I think also on that agenda is this proposal that came out of County Commission asking the Planning Commission to look at revamping the appeals process for uses on review. The Board of Zoning Appeals issue, which we talked about last week, which has certainly generated some discussion at County Commission, will probably generate some discussion at Planning Commission.
It will definitely generate some discussion at Planning Commission. And at this point, it's hard to say where the commissioners will go on it. They haven't really talked about changing processes like that. So it'll be interesting to see, how they respond. Of course, one thing about the Planning Commission, roughly half the members are appointed by the county and half by the city. So it'll be interesting also to see how that breaks down.
Right, because they all get to vote.
They all get to vote,
whether it's inside the city or outside
absolutely,
the city.
Absolutely. So that'll be kind of an interesting, subplot to the dynamic.
All right. Well, I think that's going to wrap us up for this week. As always, thanks to our producer, Lord Seth Barber at Barbarian Productions, and we'll talk to you next week.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.